I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and next to me is the new 2025 Toyota Camry. Basically a deep facelift and revision of the outgoing Camry, but under this more sculptural front end is a meaningful upgrade to the hybrid system, which is now the only powertrain that you can get for the Camry in Australia. So that's important. Now, the release of any new Camry is always momentous for the car industry. Toyota Camry is the backbone of many of the world's fleets, from taxi to rideshare to company cars to police cars, you name it. Camrys are out there doing hard miles every day. There are still some people that buy them privately, but only 30% of Camry sales in Australia are private. Now, this video will be geared in part towards those people, because if you're choosing your own car, maybe you do want to consider a sedan like the Camry rather than an SUV like a RAV4. But also, if you are given a Camry as a fleet operator, will you enjoy the experience? I'll get into that in today's video too. But before we get started, hit subscribe down below. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct.
Now, up front, I mentioned that the new Camry is basically a deep facelift, which is accurate, albeit one with some mechanical changes, which I'll cover later in the video. However, you can certainly tell cosmetic differences. I think the front clip of the Camry looks fantastic, particularly in SL format like our test car. But the interior has also gone through some significant change. And this interior layout really is one of the best in the industry in terms of feeling up to the minute with the technology on offer, but still offering lots of physical controls and easy access to the things that you need the most. In particular, the climate control, because if you're spending long hours in the Camry, you want to keep it temperate in here. The Toyota air conditioning continues to be excellent, even with the use of more environmentally friendly refrigerants for the first time in this Camry. We do also have things like seat cooling and seat heating for this SL grade, which sits at the top of a 3-variant tree. There used to be 4 Camry variants for Australia. The SX has been dropped. It's now Ascent from $39,990 plus on-road costs, then a step up to Ascent Sport, which is a nice midpoint, although still with cloth seats, for instance. And then this SL, which is now $53,990 plus on roads, is very lavishly equipped. I would call this, 80 to 90% of the way to a Lexus ES, but more like 60% of the cost. So I see the Camry SL as something of a bargain for what you're getting. Powered seats, both front seats having power and lumbar, which is great to see. The driver with memory, a decent 9-speaker JBL stereo, although it is lacking some bass, and an opening sunroof all make this thing feel quite posh. Plus, you're getting a 12.3-inch touchscreen on the top 2 Camry grades with wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. And the SL nabs a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster too, which has loads of customization. And although you're looking at things like a driver monitoring camera in the Camry on all grades now, cleverly, Toyota Australia have made most of the semi-autonomous safety technology possible to turn off, which we'll return to in the driving section. One thing I would point out is that the seats are extremely comfortable for multi-hour stints in the saddle. Your visibility out is decent despite this being a sunroof, assisted by the fitment of a digital rearview mirror on the SL. Ergonomics are almost perfect in this car. Everything is where you would expect. One of the only things I would change is that I wish the SL was also available with a non-black interior color, such as beige or tan, but that isn't possible in the Australian market. Depending on what you use your Camry for, this might be the moneymaker right here. And because the size of the Camry hasn't changed compared to the outgoing version, the back seat remains as flexible as ever. For very tall people, the headroom may be problematic. I'm 6 foot or 183 centimeters, and I do actually have ample room, even with the SL's panoramic sunroof that steals a bit of headroom. But the legroom is excellent behind my own driving position. Tow room, a little bit constricted. However, we are in a low riding sedan after all. Toyota pays a lot of attention to backseat comfort in the Camry though. The angle of the seat base is perfect, so your legs feel supported, and you have a flip down armrest with 2 cup holders. You've got air vents and USB-C ports here in the back, taking the total for the car to 5 USB-C ports. Even the back seat tops are soft as well, so this thing almost comes off as Lexus grade Certainly, it's quite premium and plush, and space is ample.
Moving around the back of the Camry sedan now, this red finish on our SL tester is certainly an attractive paint, and there's also an interesting bronze, but sadly a deep teal that's available on the US-made Camry in America did not come to Australia for our Japanese-built version, and that might have been the best color. Either way though, it's a tidy, cleaned up rear end, but only a manual boot lid. You'd have to go to the more luxurious Lexus ES product if you want something like a power tailgate here. Now, being a sedan, the boot is wide in terms of its opening, but not particularly tall in aperture. But the boot area itself goes back an awfully long way, and then beneath the boot floor, you actually do have your tools for the space saver spare wheel, which all Camrys pack. Not as good as a full-size unit, but certainly better than nothing if you're out in the sticks. And then closing up that boot is nice and easy with the integrated pull handle. Next up, let's talk about the running costs of the Camry, because this is one area the Toyota continues to be a very attractive buy compared to some other vehicles, SUV or not. Well, meaningfully, Toyota has actually deleted the non-hybrid versions of all of its passenger cars here in Australia, except for the sporty ones. So all new Camrys, just like the RAV4, Corolla Cross, Kluger, etc., will only be sold as a hybrid, and so you now get this HEV badge along the side. It's a new generation 5th gen hybrid system in the Camry. This is the model that debuts the 5th gen hybrid for Australia. A little bit more power and noticeably more miserly on the fuel consumption. Toyota claims 4 litres per 100k city and highway. I've tested this car comprehensively over my road test, and the score that I ended up with, averaging out all my driving, was 4.6 litres per 100k. So that is pretty good. Definitely noticeably better than the old car, but we're only talking about very small numbers here. 50 litre fuel tank in this vehicle, so your range is over 1,000 kilometers with the Camry, which is impressive, but it does actually require premium octane petrol these days. The last one did as well. Warranty is 5 years unlimited kilometers, servicing just over 250 bucks a pop for the first 5 services. So routine maintenance across the first 5 years and 75,000 Ks is pretty affordable. Now, any concerns about hybrid battery longevity and that sort of stuff, Toyota's tip is to get this car serviced at a Toyota dealer, particularly from the 5th year mark onward, as your hybrid battery warranty can be extended out annually to 10 years if you do so.
When thinking about the Camry and running costs, another topic that comes to mind is whether this vehicle is cheaper to run than a common EV like the Tesla Model 3. You would pay a little bit more to buy an entry-level Model 3 outright, but it could be significantly cheaper to fuel if you can charge it at home. However, returning to the idea of fleet operations, such as running it as a taxi or a rideshare vehicle, if you had to pay public charging fees to charge a Model 3, it's actually only slightly cheaper to run it for 100 kilometers compared to the Camry at the fuel efficiency that we received on test. However, maintenance might be a little bit cheaper on the Tesla. However, it's a much of a muchness in terms of running costs between those two vehicles if you don't have access to home charging. Now it's time to go for a drive, but we're going to do something a little different to the norm first. But when it comes to testing a new Camry, I actually don't think it's good enough just to do my commuting and my road tripping in this car, because there's 70% of them going to fleets and so many of them being used as taxis or ride shares. I think we actually need to recreate that experience. So me and my passenger here, we're going to drive Sydney's new metro line by road in the Camry. Really difficult stop and start stuff. It's a pretty warm day out there, so I'm going to have the cold Toyota air conditioning and cooled seats going, and let's see how we go in terms of economy and also our comfort over that time. Now, no vomiting, shark.
So what was the result? Well, my overall fuel economy in the Camry was 4.6 litres per 100 Ks, which is really impressive in this more difficult environment of warm weather, absolute stop and start, all urban. I did 4.9 litres per 100 Ks and had a really nice little tour of Sydney. Super nice blue skies out there. Shark did not vomit, which is awesome, and the Camry remains fit for purpose for this kind of job. Really good seats, superb air conditioning, and even more smooth tuning of the petrol and electric systems, particularly the brake pedal. This car is easy to do all day in terms of working, which is important because that's the job for so many people with this car. All right, so jumping into the new Camry now, let's take it for a drive. And as with other Toyota hybrids, you glide off in electric silence, which is always pleasant. But when you call up some power, the engine switches on. And that's where I want to start when it comes to the 2025 Camry, because this is not the most in-depth update in the world, but one thing the new Camry has, which no other Toyota does in the Australian market, is what the company calls its 5th generation hybrid system. So first generation Toyota hybrids date back to the Prius of the late 1990s. We're now up to only the 5th generation of the company's series parallel hybrid, and that's under the bonnet here. In this particular iteration, it's a 2.5 litre naturally aspirated petrol 4-cylinder engine with 138 kilowatts of power, but teamed up to 2 electric motors on the front axle, which produce 100 kilowatts of power and just over 200 newton meters between them. And that adds up to a combined number of 170 kilowatts of power. That's the peak the system can give you when everything is all in order. And that's an increase over the old Camry, which had 160 kilowatts of combined power. Now, the thing is, the old Camry actually never felt particularly weak in terms of performance. So the boost for the new model with 10 kilowatts more combined power is really just a nice to have. And it has the intended result, which is that the Camry feels just that little bit more effortless now. And I think that's particularly important given that no market is actually getting this new Camry with a V6 petrol engine, which briefly existed for the outgoing shape here in Australia. And in the past, there were 6-cylinder Camrys more commonly, or the Avalon model here in Australia as well. Now it's just the 4-cylinder hybrid Camry, so it's a good thing that the performance on offer from the powertrain is more than decent. Now, I've done my usual thing of testing the Camry across a wide variety of driving. You already saw my little segment trying to do Tom's rideshare service of sorts, and of course things were fine in that stop-start urban environment, but on the highway and on country roads the performance is also adequate. You do notice the cabin is a little noisy on the highway. That was a bit of a surprise, and Toyota talks about the additional sound insulation that's gone into the car. It must be very subtle because I could not identify an improvement on the old version on that front. But where you do identify an improvement is in the perkiness of the powertrain. The Camry gets up to speed nice and smartly and stays at that speed pretty effortlessly. And you even notice it jumping into EV mode at highway speeds when you have a light load, you're coasting, you're going downhill, it's shutting off that engine. And that's one of the reasons why it's possible to eke such great fuel economy out of the Camry without even really trying. And for me, that's just such a huge benefit of going for a Toyota hybrid, is you don't have to adapt your lifestyle whatsoever. Not only do you not even need to plug the car in, which is how these series parallel hybrids or self-charging hybrids compare to plug-in hybrids, but you can actually just drive the Camry however you want, and it kind of delivers the same fuel economy really no matter what. It doesn't vary by significant degrees. Now, a bit like with the old car, when you want to build speed quickly, you do hear the engine, but it's actually not that unpleasant a sound. You know it's a petrol 4-cylinder, but it doesn't sound wheezy or whiny. It's just a bassy thrum in the background. I would say the related Lexus ES is quieter, is more subdued inside, but they've improved the Camry to such an extent now that that gap is smaller than ever. One other thing which I think you will really notice, particularly if you go from an old Camry to a new Camry, is that the braking system is much more refined on the new generation car, and it is a new electronically controlled system Toyota has slotted in. The brake pedal feel of a Toyota hybrid has never been better than it is on the new Camry hybrid. You are so hard pressed to tell the difference between regenerative braking and the physical brakes. This is excellent. So far, we've only seen this kind of work from the likes of Porsche or BMW in the EV braking space. So to see Toyota really getting stuck into that is just wonderful. Really good job to the software and hardware engineers who have achieved that feat. Otherwise, the handling and ride of the Camry is fit for purpose. The ride quality is very good, particularly at urban speeds, which is what you'd want. It still doesn't love a sharp-edged bump or pothole, particularly on the SL's 18-inch wheels, but I'm really splitting hairs. On the whole, the ride quality is supple and very much fit for purpose. Definitely comfort biased, I would say. You wouldn't call the Camry a sporty machine, but in actual fact, body control is very good in the Camry, and you can hustle the vehicle along on quite a fun country road, and the Camry delivers decent dynamics. Something like a Hyundai Sonata N-Line is going to be sportier again, or you could opt for the slightly smaller but more dynamic Skoda Octavia, such as in RS guys, and you will have more fun behind the wheel of that car. But the Camry is interesting to me because it does deliver such amazing fuel economy while still also being fairly sophisticated and engaging from behind the wheel. So in that sort of sense, it's an incredibly sweet spot in the car market, and I really enjoy that. In terms of things like safety features, I mentioned before, you can turn many of them off and they stay off. The lane keeping does tend to come back on, but it's relatively subtle. You can upgrade it to a lane tracing at will with a button here on the steering wheel, but various functionality can in fact be turned off. One thing I noticed, the adaptive cruise control is very, very smooth. The blind spot monitoring is accurate. And we've also got things like junction AEB fitted as standard to this car as well. And that's from the base model up. So the Camry on the whole is a very sorted vehicle to drive. In a way, you'd say the Camry is unmemorable, but I don't even mean that in a bad way. I mean it in that the car has so few flaws. There's little to point out that requires all that much improvement. And I think that's such a big change from the old days of the Camry, where it was staid, uninspired, and pretty soggy to drive. These days, these Toyota sedans are just really solid and sorted to drive. And given this is a car which does most of its Ks in this country as a fleet vehicle, not really doing anything particularly interesting or inspired, I would suggest that Camry is probably better than it needs to be. So that's my initial impression of the new 2025 Toyota Camry. A nice upgrade if you might already be running a Camry. You will notice the additional power, you will notice your fuel consumption ticking down a bit, and that interior is a really nice place to be, particularly on the SL. Now for private buyers, should you consider a Camry? Well, sure. If you're not into the SUV thing, you want a Toyota, you want a hybrid, this sedan really is all that. The Camry might have had an old hat kind of image back in the day. The new one looks pretty good, and it's hard to fault the way this vehicle drives where it's priced. It's certainly not a sports car. It is biased more towards comfort, but it gets that job done extremely well, all while sipping fuel. If you are a taxi driver, a rideshare operator, small business owner, or someone just given the keys to a Camry from your fleet, well, you can expect this car to drive well and serve you well. Probably don't be annoyed if you get given a Camry. In fact, if I had a choice of this or some of the other vehicles that might be given to you as a fleet car, I'd probably be aiming for the Camry, because this thing is actually a quietly confident, highly achieving mid-size car, and that's exactly what Toyota wants it to be. So for me, this is job done. However, in the back of my mind, I do have a question about whether the Camry's in a bit of a holding pattern. We know that Toyota is working with the likes of BYD on next generation hybrid systems. And I sort of wonder whether the next Camry might be a big leap towards something like a plug-in hybrid with really significant electric range and even more miserly fuel consumption. So are we about to see something much bigger for the next Camry step change? Perhaps, that's a hypothetical, but it is in the back of my mind, as I say. What do you think about that? Let me know down below in the comments. While you're there, hit subscribe and the notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.